my warmest friends. It was so good of you to come all this way. You must be dying to begin. It won't be long now, so rest in peace. I'll be coming for you soon, oh, very soon. Your time has nearly come. Just a little farther now. Oh, roughly 6 feet or so. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I frighten you? Perhaps that was in bad spirit. Try to stay lively. Your wait is at an end. Make yourself comfortable and take one last look behind you. If knowing what's behind you will make you feel any better. As for me, I like to be surprised. Time to cross over now. So step inside my library and welcome to Ghost Stories for Grown-ups. Welcome back to our library. Here dwells fond memories of all the spice of life. Let's begin with news from our Dead Files with Mabel.
Hi, I'm Mabel, and this is tonight's news from the Dead Files. Tonight, we'll be digesting a subject that has the potential to be truly terrifying. The mysteries of sausage. Ugh, I shudder to think at what awaits us. What exactly is sausage? A question the world has pondered for millennia. Discussion on this topic has been, at times, contentious, and answers have varied. Merriam-Webster defines sausage as a highly seasoned minced meat, such as pork, usually stuffed in casings of prepared animal intestine. How the heck do they make that sound nice? Notice how pork is offered as an example, but not a requirement. Makes you wonder what else they put in there. Anyway, in 1909, the New York Sun covered the International Butchers' Congress held in Paris as the group debated on the definition of sausage. Of all the things to debate about, sausage. The original proposal was for sausage to be defined as intestine of pork filled with raw meat, chopped up and seasoned. But the Paris butcher said no, arguing that sausage must be made of pig's meat. That angered the butchers from other parts of the country, who argued that donkeys and mules give excellent sausages. So does the horse. Other agitated butchers declared that sausage must also contain beef and veal, and never pork alone. After a lengthy and loud debate, voices finally died down, and the article describes how, quote, a little man arose, and in a quiet voice said, "Gentlemen, you have forgotten the dog." Then the arguing began again. By the end, a motion was passed that the words sausage, sausage meat, savloy, when used without epithet, means a mixture of pork, beef, and veal is employed. This concluded what the article described as the stormiest meeting the Congress had to date. This 1911 description not only references the already debated types of meat, but also includes mutton, goose, game liver, fowls, fish, and crabs. Sometimes the disagreement comes not from what the content of sausage is, but who gets to make that decision? In 1956, Great Britain was embroiled in a heated debate about who had the right to define sausage. When the Minister of Food was tasked with creating a definition, the National Federation of Meat Traders argued against it, wanting consumers to define sausage by taste. At the Federation's annual gathering, the Windsor Star reported that the meeting cheered when it was announced that the Minister of Food has agreed to meet and be grilled. That's a quote, folks. Meet and be grilled by a deputation of convinced free sausage makers. Maybe the sausage should not be defined, but compared. Bang, banger, bangest. So why the hubbub over sausage? Well, for hundreds of years, newspapers have reported deaths and severe illness from sausage poisoning, also known as botulism or ptomaine, due to improperly assembled or undercooked sausage, or the use of tainted ingredients in a putrid state. Ugh. Here is just a handful of sausage poisoning examples. And it was so easy to slip unknown ingredients into unregulated sausage that the meat product became relatively popular for ne'er-do-wells to intentionally deliver poisons. Like this schnitzel in 1927, who began his serial killing spree by poisoning sausages to kill animals, then evolved into tainted candy to off the neighborhood kids. Unfortunately, a number of city governments became inspired to eliminate their population of stray dogs by leaving poisoned sausages laying around. Had city leaders put a little more thought into this plan, they would have known that unattended children would find and eat the links. Even adults had been reported to find and accidentally eat tainted sausages. This became so problematic that some governments instructed their police departments on where to leave the links and how to avoid accidental poisonings. Fortunately, the wide use of this method has since been abandoned. Oh no, don't! It's stupid! Even if you above-grounders can't agree on who defines sausage and what the definition should be, I feel like the majority would at least agree on 2 points. Sausage shouldn't be intentionally poisoned, and sausage should never contain people. This disturbing 1946 story from Hungary recounts the arrest of several individuals who confessed to making human sausage and selling it the evidence to customers in Austria. Oh, I think I'm gonna be sick. This 1895 sampling, committed a little closer to home in Ann Arbor, Michigan, tells of Norman Cameron being suspended from university for leaking the report of a medical student eating human sausage. Faculty was upset, not that the report was true, but that it would damage the university's reputation. Oh, those wacky Wolverines. OH!
I-ho.
And this story from 1919 Germany describes an urban legend that created a wild rumor across Berlin that sausage makers were kidnapping women and children and turning them into sausage. Sausage consumption plummeted, but had already declined in the U.S. due to the crime story in Chicago that sparked this urban legend and many others around the world. Meet Adolf and Louisa Lutgert. Adolf had been an ambitious Chicago tavern keeper who had a dream of being the sausage king of the world when he left the tavern biz and started the Lutgert Sausage Works. But before that, during his tavern keeping days, a man was found dead in the back alley at the tavern's door. At the time, police couldn't find any evidence of foul play, but suspected Adolf and his quick temper had a hand in the man's death. Years later, when Adolf's wife Louisa disappeared in 1897, Police Captain Hermann Schutler recognized the Lutgert name and launched an investigation. Turns out the Lutgert couple wasn't a happy one. Louisa was vocal about her disappointment with some of Adolf's business mishaps, and Adolf had been heard talking about how much he despised his wife. Adolf had even set up an apartment in his factory so he wouldn't have to sleep at home and was known to have a mistress visit regularly. One day, an unusual shipment of potash and arsenic arrived at the factory, and Adolf instructed workers to load the ingredients into one of the basement sausage vats, but to be careful getting on the skin, as it could leave a nasty burn. That night, Adolf visited the family home that sat at the back of the factory and sent the kids to bed. Eyewitnesses claim they saw Adolf leading his wife to the factory later that night, despite Adolf swearing in court that he left Louisa reading at home. Even later that evening, factory workers could hear the sausage vats beginning to boil. One worker attempted to open the vat room door, but it was blocked. Adolf yelled out not to worry, that he was working on an experiment, and sent everyone home for the night. When police came to investigate, they searched every inch of the factory and discovered a foul-smelling residue in one of the vats. The vat was drained, and in addition to a few bone fragments, Louisa's rings, including the engraved wedding ring that Adolf had given to her, was discovered in the muck. Adolf was arrested and tried for the murder of his wife Louisa, making this one of the earliest cases in which someone was tried for murder without a body ever being found. The trial led to a steep decline in sausage sales, as rumors that Adolf had turned his wife into sausage called Louisa Links and sold them to unsuspecting retailers ran rampant through Chicago and would slowly spread around the world. Adolf insisted that he was merely dabbling in soap making and that the unhappy Louisa skipped town. His story planted enough doubt that his first trial ended with a hung jury. But before the second trial began, a group of chemists conducted an experiment to see if they could liquidate a body with the same chemicals in Adolf's so-called soap project. The experiment successfully liquefied a cadaver in about 2 hours. With this evidence, the second trial ended with a guilty verdict in 1898. But without a body, instead of hanging for his crime, Adolf was sentenced to life in prison, insisting that he was innocent and Louisa would show up any day. Louisa never came. Adolf didn't exactly live a clean life, and thanks to years of alcohol and sausages, he only lasted a little over a year in prison, dying of a heart failure in his 50s. But before he died in 1900, he reportedly told a fellow inmate that he made a mistake about those rings. Adolph's sausage factory and home sat abandoned for several years, and there were numerous sightings of Louisa's ghost in the factory windows. In 1901, after the factory neighbors reported seeing Louisa's ghost, officers were sent to investigate. Upon arrival, they witnessed a woman standing in the basement where the famous bat used to be. This 1901 article describes an officer rushing the figure that disappeared, causing his head to go through a window pane. A crowd observing the building outside said that when they heard the glass break, they saw a light appear in the top of the factory. Fun fact! During the murder investigation, even Adolph saw the ghost but was convinced that the police had hired a local woman to haunt the factory and drive him mad. The woman actually had to testify in court that she did no such thing. After Adolph's death, a company called the Library Bureau moved into the factory to manufacture library furniture and sold the house that was then moved a few blocks away. But the move couldn't shake the stigmatized property of its ghost. Residents often reported seeing both the ghosts of Louisa and Adolph, but never at the same time and never in the same room. That's all from Tales from the Dead Files, where truth is stranger than fiction, and I am suddenly wondering about the varnish on this library table. And if I have to say the word sausage one more time, I am going to scream! Breakfast, anyone?
Thank you, Mabel. How delicious. Now, let's further whet the appetite with tonight's featured short story, Frank Hyde, from the collection of shorts edited by Marie O'Regan, entitled Phantoms, published by Titan Books, and read by tonight's guest, Luke Powers.
Frank Hyde by Josh Mallerman. Oh, to see Lauren again, once more in any way. Oh, to take this time to really see her exactly as she was, so that her true features might finally replace the memory he'd held on to. A memory that had blurred in the 6 years since her death, as though the tears he'd shed stood like a pane of glass between himself and her. Frank walked out the door onto the street when he experienced guilt of any sort. When he detected it coming, he walked out the front door, out onto the street, toward the meadow he walked. Oh, to see Lauren again, to hold up both hands, palms out, to say, hang on, wait a second, while I study your face, so that when it goes away again, I will remember it exactly as it was. No more of this blurred vision, shaken by guilt, this interior room of darkness. He'd spelled her name wrong in a letter, thanking her folks for their help with the funeral. He'd forgotten her name entirely one night, very drunk while speaking her. Guilt, yes, for not being able to recall the exact distance from the end of her nose to the curve of her chin, from the side of her eyes to her ears. Shouldn't Frank be able to recite those numbers to a man much more artistic than himself? And shouldn't that artist be capable of rendering Lauren exactly as she was? Guilt, ugly indeed. Frank walked down the street, toward the woods, toward the meadow. He'd been walking a lot lately. Long walks that requested stretching beforehand, a bottle of water during and often breaks. He always took the same route, out the front door of the home that had plenty of photos of him and Lauren on the walls, all the way to where Bolton Street ended, of which Lauren had joked, God didn't like our street, put an end to it, and then over the quadrille and into the woods, to the meadow, Frank would go. It burned him up inside, lit up that dark interior room, to recall how bothered he'd be by Lauren's constant prattling about exercise and good food, laughter and sleep. By God, sometimes it sounded like she'd emerged from the 19th century, when doctors decided fresh air and water cured all bad things. It was easy to bring back to life the terrible uneasiness he felt every time Lauren saw him on the couch, every time her eyes traversed the length of the living room and settled on him, just sitting there watching a movie, television show, relaxing. Oh, she'd look out the window, silently saying, "You're hiding, Frank, from the real world." Frank often wondered, how might you rename relaxing if someone was constantly there to rile it? Lauren was certainly stuck on the healthy stuff. Oh, was she? Jogging, vitamins, vegetarian. She felt bad after every time she drank and made sure to remind a hungover Frank of the many other ways they might have had fun the night before. Like looking at the stars, like giving each other full body massages, like playing classical music low and getting into long conversations that could revolve around anything so long as the echoes of progress and philosophy were involved. It was enough to drive Frank mad. He walked to the end of the street, over the guardrails, into the woods. Today, despite the flaring anger at his ways, despite the guilt too, Frank found himself missing the very things Lauren had said so often become little hammers tapping against his stability, until her good intentions sounded more like howling. You shouldn't hide from the real world, Frank. He walked in the woods now, hidden in a way. Lauren had loved a lot of things when she was alive, but none quite so much as the meadow. When she'd returned from walks of her own, as Frank pretended to just be sitting down or just getting up, the smile she wore, the contentedness he'd seen in her eyes was inarguably due to his time spent in the meadow. And on the days when she hadn't walked, the inverse expression could be seen in her face as well, as she always seemed to be standing close enough to the window to look out through the glass, as though seeing this open expanse of glory where the bees didn't bother you and they expected the same. Frank understood now. These days, the meadow was good after all. Lauren had been right. Moving, exercising, getting a good night's sleep. Oh, to see Lauren again. Frank walked as the almost cartoonish nature of the deep, dark woods had him thinking of movie sets like The Wizard of Oz, where the browns were perhaps too brown and the greens too green. In the end, thank God for that. Or those same woods might have been a bit scary to traverse. And who could be scared when salvation lay in the Lauren meadow, less than a smile away? Here, a perfect summer afternoon, a Saturday no less, away from the office, away from the home, and away from the window of that home. The window Lauren used to longingly look through, as though constantly wanting to be out in the world. Out, moving, walking, exercising, eating well, breathing fresh air, anywhere but near Frank and the television and a dinner of pizza and fries. Frank got it, now these days. In the 6 years since Lauren's passing, he'd shed some 6 or 7 pounds, eaten more vegetables, taken more walks, like this walk, the walk that brought him to the end of the woods, and thus to the sunlight, glossing the colorful meadow before him. Oh, to see this meadow reflected in Lauren's eyes, the reds and purples, the whites and yellows and greens. The smell changed, a better smell. The second he crossed the boundary of woods and meadows, a new smell, so sudden it was as if he'd been in the meadow all along, as if the woods were mourning, and this here, at last, the day. Ahead, The meadow stretched a half-mile until it faded into a grassy hill that rose to meet more woods. But for the moment, the space looked like forever, open and hopeful. No guilt out there, nowhere to hide at all. But that wasn't entirely so. No, as Frank squinted into the sunlight ahead, he saw something that possibly didn't belong. Surely a thing that hadn't been in the meadow before. If it was a city sign, he couldn't read it from that distance. Rectangular and raised, possibly telling people like Frank there would be no trespassing on a perfect day like today. Frank didn't turn back, and the closer he got, the less he believed it was a sign. In fact, whatever it was, it seemed to reflect the blue of the sky, the meadow itself, so that from this distance, it looked something like a painting upon an easel, left behind by an artist who had decided a long widower ought to find it. Encounter the reality and the rendering at once. Frank could easily imagine a man or a woman having fallen off for the still air, the peaceful quiet, the inherent health and beauty of the meadow. He looked for her, or him, the artist, as the unavoidable floor of flowers and tall grass crunched underfoot. He looked for who had left this painting, this picture, this inspiration, proof of a good place that Lauren loved so dearly. But as he approached, as he continued to outwalk the guilt he'd felt coming, he saw it wasn't only sky and meadow in the frame, but a person too. He raised a hand and waved. The person waved back. That person was himself. A reflection. Then, the back of a metal sign, reflecting the meadow, the sky himself. Frank continued, hands in his pockets now, feeling less alone, more like he was being watched, more like whoever had put the sign up was still there, nearby, close enough that he or she might pop out from behind a tree, say, "Hey there, you look like you thought you were alone. You looked genuinely surprised. You looked guilty." Frank stopped walking. He had to, because he'd gotten close enough now to see the thing was clearly not a sign, and it was also not a painting. He had to make sense of what it actually was. A window, suspended, it seemed about the meadow. There was no debating it. The rectangular frame, the chipped wooden crossbar that indicated the split between the panes of glass, the place a person might put your hands to push it open. Frank laughed. What else was there to do? And how might one rename sense if there was something in the way of making it? He didn't doubt it was a window. It was undeniably so. So how to explain it? He looked into the far boundaries of the window, expecting to see a stranger, artist, than the ones he'd imagined only moments ago. This window being some sort of theater, an installation, performance art, something. There was clearly no stand propping the window up, and certainly no arching branch above it to be hung. Yet there it hung, unwavering, as though lodged into the house he could not see. Frank didn't like it, didn't like the feeling it gave him, as if the window itself was more alone than he thought he'd been, as if even someone were looking out from the window, a face on the other side of the glass. Not his own reflected. Frank stepped aside, but there was nowhere to hide in all this open meadow. A cloud covered the sun. The reflection of the glass slipped away. Frank no longer needed to squint at the houseless window. What he saw scared him deeply. Space, room, an impossible, dim-lit depth behind the glass. An under-exercised part of his mind told him he had two choices, and two choices only. Go straight home and stay forever afraid of what he'd seen in the meadow, or make sense of this now. "Hello?" he called, because he had to make a sound, prove he was still Frank in the meadow. face behind the glass, maybe, swallowed by the reflection of the meadow as the sun shone again. Lauren? He hadn't told himself it's her, hadn't even decided it was a face at all. Her name came out just the same. Frank stepped back from the window. He thought of his dead wife, standing by the window at home, thought of her longing to go outside. He said that a lot, especially near the end of things. The days when she grew increasingly sick, as her weight dropped considerably, as she struggled to flash healthy smiles in his direction. Frank still sitting on the couch, smiling, able-bodied in return, thinking, I've been poisoning you for a week. How long does it take? Movement behind the glass? Frank stepped back. Again, a little more. How long indeed? Perhaps that answer lay in the very method and delivery of the poison, as Frank had slipped it into the one thing Lauren wouldn't mind staying home for, the one thing she enjoyed almost as much as the meadow. Good, healthy food. How torturous those days had been, being forced to sustain a feeling of righteousness when a single violent motion could have done the trick in seconds or less. A tapping on the glass. Frank came out of his reverie, his nerves electric with the heat of sudden fear, as if the explanation of the suspended window was about to be given straight out under the blinding sun, clear as the glowing gilt. He stared for a long time at the glass. No tapping, nobody at the glass to tap it. Rather, a new cloud had come, lessening the reflection once more, exposing the depth behind the impossible glass. A room, absolutely. A dark room, right here in the middle of the blazing afternoon. Frank ducked momentarily, looking to the flowers and tall grass beyond the suspended window, as if he might see there an expanse of darkness, a long stretch of an empty room, impossibly placed in the meadow. Life behind the glass? No, Frank didn't think so. Frank refused to think so. Widower, window, widow, widower. Go home, he told himself. Get some sleep. Drink some water. He turned his back on the glass, saw movement, new colors emerging from the woods. A man in blue? 2. Frankie thought, Hyde. But where? The woods were too far. The flowers, tall grass, 2 out in the open. Frank imagined the men pointing at him on the meadow floor. That's him. Guy who poisoned his wife's vegetables. His wife who meant no harm. His wife who was right. Walks are good. Water and fresh air. Get off the couch. Don't hide from the real world, Frank. Frank looked to the sky as if there might be a rope. Something to remove him from the meadow. He looked to the window, to the darkness beyond the glass. Then, incredibly, he placed his hands upon the chipped wood of the lower pane's frame, pushing the window open. He heard the men walking as he lifted his legs through the nothingness beneath the window. As he planted a shoe on the sill, as he climbed into the suspended foundationless frame. On the other side, his nose to the glass, he watched the men approach, their strong forms testing the stitches of their uniforms. Frank ducked to the side, watched them by way of peering, leering, imagining them pointing to the window, saying, It took us 6 years, but we found him. He's in there, in that room, hiding from the real world. They were in range of the window now. Must have been able to see it. But neither pointed, neither squinted, neither said, What's that suspended in the meadow? Instead, they talked, nodded to each other's words. Frank couldn't hear. Or could he? Certainly he'd heard something. Words, indeed. Words from the dark room he stood in. He turned, saw life in that darkness. No, saw death, saw a ghost, and poisoned food. Oh, to see Lauren again. Frank tried to open the window, pounded on the glass. Help, he cried. Let me out. The men in blue were so close now, weapons at their hips, that could easily shatter the glass, hands that could so easily help open the window. Help! Frank's hands were wet from the glass, as if the pain were made of tears. More words from the darkness, movement too. One officer looked in the direction of the window as they walked, his eyes and nose less than a foot from the glass. Frank pounded. The man in blue seemed to look through the glass, straight through the room itself, tilting his head, briefly, as if perhaps hearing the almost undetectable sound of poison being sprinkled into a bowl of soup. Then he stood nodding, walking past the window, in step with the fellow officer. Frank heard their muffled words, heard them loud enough to understand them, as a cloud covered the sun again, bringing to life a reflection here, inside, this side of the glass. How it should be, one officer said, in the end. You believe in that? Asked the other. After what we've seen? But Frank couldn't see them anymore. As they'd passed from view, as the whole of the meadow was replaced with the dim-lit reflection of the room. And a face, too, over his shoulder, coming to look out the window. Oh, to see Lauren again. Oh, to see Lauren. Oh.
Well done, Master Luke. Our own ghoul was so inspired that he wrote this original work.
Patties, Lynx, and a missing wife. Is there any better form of processed breakfast meat than a glorious sausage, a fantastic treat? A patty, a link, and a huge bowl of gravy. Compressed bits of beef and pork leavings so wavy. Be they pork, be they beef, or turkey in a casing. If you ask what they're made of, you might hate what you're facing. With patties so round, so flat, and so greasy, paired with a muffin, they go down so easy. Chopped in a bowl, slathered with gravy and a biscuit. Makes a mouth water, the combination seems mystic. There are sausages that look like snakes in a curl. There are others, the smell invites you to hurl. Conferences and committees to discuss what's in the meat. Some discussions are held about how long to heat. There are sausages made of horse, sheep, and goat. Pretty sure that last one will cause you to bloat. Those made of venison, rabbit, or dog can't touch the original made with a hog. Probably best to not know what you're consuming, especially if the sausage was made out of human. What is wrong with people? Dom or party of one, your table is ready. No matter what type of spiced tubular meat greatness, to say all sausage is great is totally baseless. Links made of intestines to hold them together, to patties of alligator like chewing on leather. No matter the sausage that you want to make, there are definitely meats that are a real big mistake. No lizards, no skunk, no possums or frogs, no snakes, no rodents or slimy things under logs. No raccoons, no groundhogs, or people met on the street. Hannibal Lecter, you're not. Let's keep that out of the meat. No Viking delicacy of shark buried in dirt in a jar. Please don't break the seal, the stench travels far. So if you're a saluminist living a sausage life, know if I bite into a ring, I'll suspect it's your wife. So may your patties be greasy, your links all be round. Let your gravy be chunky, and keep your spouse above ground. Ground, get it? Oh, man, some strange sausages going on. Why can't food just be normal, like burgers, pizza, pasta, ostrich eggs, spaghetti, kidneys, gizzards, liver, eye newt, toads, green things, slimy?
Oh, cool. Well, don't you have such eclectic tastes? Before we send you back on that dark journey home tonight, here is one brief word from our sponsor.
In a world with great chefs like Childs, Ramsay, Fieri, Wilson, We have Shane. Shane collects disgusting recipes. We scare up those recipes. Then, Shane eats it. Now playing on the Plain City Public Library YouTube channel. Tell a friend.
Alas, it seems our time has come to an end. But only until next time. Until then, remember, be nice to spiders. Have tea with the ghost in your attic. And don't forget to feed the monster under your bed. Good night.